On April 15, 1945, in the area southwest of Bergen in Nazi Germany, the sound of British tanks rolling through the gates of Bergen-Belsen marked a moment of profound horror. The liberators encountered a scene that defied all human understanding, with over 13,000 bodies scattered across open fields, left to decompose without any regard for dignity. Additionally, around 60,000 prisoners remained, their bodies reduced to mere skeletons, hanging on to life by the thinnest threads. The soldiers, who had endured the brutalities of war for years, found themselves utterly speechless. A thick, oppressive stench of death permeated everything, clinging to their clothes and embedding itself deep within their memories. They were confronting the tangible evidence of a genocide that no description could fully encapsulate. Yet, in the midst of this unimaginable nightmare at Bergen-Belsen, among the captured SS guards, there stood a young woman who appeared almost out of place. At just 22 years old, she possessed a striking beauty, with soft features and intense blue eyes that might have fooled anyone into seeing her as something gentle. To those who did not know better, she could have seemed like a figure of innocence, but hidden beneath that exterior was a soul corrupted by unimaginable cruelty. Her name was Irma Grese, and her actions would forever brand her in history as a figure of pure terror, often referred to as the beautiful beast. Her time at Belsen was not where her story began. It was the culmination of a path soaked in blood, one that had already wound through places like Ravensbrück, CK, and Auschwitz. The question lingers: how could a simple girl from a farm transform into one of the most dreaded female overseers in the Nazi system? How does an appearance of beauty conceal such profound sadism? And what drove her, at such a tender age, to embrace an existence filled with brutality and authority? This evening, we delve into the darker corners of the past to explore the creation of such a figure. On October 7, 1923, in a quiet rural village called Rechen in Germany, a baby girl entered the world within a humble dairy farming family. She was named Irma Ida Ilse Grese, the third child among 5 siblings, in an environment that appeared straightforward, serene, and distant from the storms of politics and conflict. Her early years should have been unremarkable, consisting of daily chores on the farm, local celebrations, and the steady pace of countryside living. Her father, Alfred Grese, was a stern and at times aggressive man, but he held a strong aversion to the rising Nazi movement, unlike many of his neighbours. By 1933, as Adolf Hitler ascended to power, the nation was flooded with Nazi ideology through schools, broadcasts, and public gatherings. Young boys paraded in youth group outfits, while girls were encouraged to participate in organisations for German maidens. Alfred, however, remained resolute, prohibiting his children from joining these groups. This stance might have stemmed from a sense of moral conviction or bravery, yet it also sowed seeds of contradiction. In trying to shield his family from the regime's influence, he perhaps ignited in young Irma a rebellious spirit, a yearning for acceptance that would eventually pull her toward the very beliefs he rejected. Then, tragedy struck in 1936, when Irma was merely 13. Her mother, Berta, learned of her husband's infidelity, and overwhelmed by the pain of betrayal, she took her own life. In an instant, the fragile foundation of the Grese home crumbled. The absence of her mother left Irma feeling unmoored, adrift in a sea of grief. The father who stayed behind offered no solace. Instead, he became a source of harsh punishment and control, using his hands and belt to enforce his will, instilling in his children the idea that true strength arose from overpowering others rather than from kindness. At school, Irma faced difficulties, enduring mockery from peers, watching her academic performance decline and ultimately leaving education behind at 14. What was left was an adolescent girl marked by sorrow, wounded by mistreatment, and eager to flee a reality where she felt insignificant, helpless, and rejected. Over the following years, she wandered aimlessly, spending half a year labouring on a farm, then in a store, only to find herself without employment once more. Each endeavour concluded in disappointment, dismissal, and shame. Beneath this surface of quiet desperation, however, a deeper resentment simmered, along with a craving for dominance. By 1939, as the globe plunged into war, Irma Grese stood at a pivotal juncture. The philosophy her father had opposed would become her avenue to authority and her descent into shadow. At 15, Irma appeared as a wandering spirit, navigating existence without direction. But destiny soon placed her within the grasp of the mechanisms that would mould her into something monstrous. She secured employment at the H. Henlichen Sanatorium, a facility that presented itself as a standard medical centre. However, within its clean corridors, brutality disguised itself as scientific progress. The place was overseen by a physician favoured by high-ranking Nazi officials, who would gain notoriety for performing experiments on humans in camps. Even in those initial years, his approaches reflected a chilling objectivity, viewing people as mere instruments. Here, young Irma started as a basic aide to nurses, tasked with delivering water, mopping floors, and gathering materials. Yet, she was pulled further into the disturbing aspects of Nazi medical practices. Accounts from later times indicated she was more than a bystander. She actively involved herself. A girl not yet 16 was aiding in procedures that straddled the boundary between care and torment. For 2 years, Irma's sense of compassion gradually withered away. In an environment where empathy should have thrived, she adopted apathy. Where understanding ought to have directed her actions, she embraced detachment. She viewed pain not as a calamity, but as an everyday occurrence. Her aspiration to qualify as a nurse shattered, her inadequate schooling blocked that route. Instead, she was demoted, assigned to produce butter on a dairy farm. This demotion gnawed at her. She had sampled a sinister form of influence, and now it was ripped away. Each repetitive day at the churning device, every tedious motion, fueled an increasing anger within her. By 1942, that anger discovered its release. At 17, Irma Grese sought to enlist in the SS Auxiliary Forces. The Nazi apparatus, eager for dedicated overseers to manage its expanding camp system, accepted her eagerly. Before long, she embarked on a train bound for Ravensbrück, the infamous women's concentration camp. What lay ahead was not just employment. It was an immersion into aggression, into viciousness, into a realm where human existence held no value. It was at this point that Irma Grese began her transformation into the beautiful beast. In July 1942, the heavy iron gates of Ravensbrück concentration camp shut behind the 17-year-old Irma Grese. This was no ordinary detention centre. It was a machine designed to rob individuals of their humanity until nothing remained. More than 130,000 women would enter Ravensbrück, and 92,000 would perish within its confines. For Irma, this was not a sight of dread. It was a training ground, the SS Academy for female overseers. Here, brutality was not condemned. It was instructed, refined, and celebrated. Her mentor was a ruthless supervisor whose reputation still evokes fear in survivor accounts. This instructor imparted a straightforward doctrine: extract work until demise, and then demand even more. For Irma, who had experienced only belittlement and weakness, this was exhilarating. For the first time, she wielded control over others, supported by the most terrifying authority in existence. Under this guidance, Irma mastered commanding inmates, shattering their resolve, and turning penalties into spectacles. But Ravensbrück Fouquet provided her with something even more ominous, a reconnection with the physician from her earlier employment at H.O. Henlichen. He was now there, carrying out horrific experiments on Polish women, intentionally fracturing bones, contaminating wounds, and removing limbs without pain relief. 80 women fell victim to his actions. Many died in agony. Those who survived carried permanent marks and deformities. By his side stood Irma Grese, no longer merely an aide, but an enthusiastic collaborator. She observed the suffering, internalized the ruthlessness, and alarmingly, experienced thrill instead of revulsion. By age 18, Irma had advanced to a full SS overseer. The clumsy, tormented youth had evolved into someone who savoured her emerging supremacy. Her whip served as her expression, her uniform as her shield. In 1943, she returned home for a short time and discussed her duties at Ravensbrück IK nonchalantly. Her father, appalled, struck her with a belt and ordered her not to go back. But the change was irreversible. The camps had bestowed upon her meaning, selfhood, and a distorted form of authority she refused to relinquish. Soon she was moved to the heart of Nazi atrocity, Auschwitz-Birkenau. There, in the vastest killing facility ever constructed, she would ascend further, becoming a source of fear for multitudes and revered among SS colleagues as the ideal female overseer. The rural child had disappeared. In her place was a young woman intoxicated by control, oblivious to ethics, and stepping deliberately further into the void. In March 1943, the entrances of Auschwitz. Birkenau engulfed Irma Grese completely, and within its extensive fenced boundaries, she discovered her authentic arena. Auschwitz was not simply a camp, it was a factory of annihilation where thousands of individuals, men, women, and children, were handled, divested of possessions, and obliterated daily. For Irma, Auschwitz was captivating. Here she no longer needed to conceal her viciousness. It was promoted, praised, and even envied by her equals. Inmates soon murmured a moniker that adhered to her like venom, the beautiful beast. On initial observation, she appeared ethereal. Accounts from those who endured described her as stunning, with refined traits, impeccable complexion, and captivating blue eyes. One prisoner, compelled to aid Nazi medical staff, later remarked that she was among the most attractive women ever witnessed. But concealed behind that ethereal facade was a spirit fortified like iron. Her preferred instrument was a whip crafted from braided cellophane, lightweight and simple to cleanse of bloodstains. Each dawn, as lines of prisoners trudged to labour, she would strike arbitrarily, targeting faces, torsos, limbs, not for order, but for enjoyment. Even when the camp leader cautioned her to cease, repulsed by her overindulgence, she disregarded the directive. She had transcended limits. By May 1944, at only 20, Irma advanced to chief overseer of Birkenau's Camp C, managing 30,000 Hungarian Jews squeezed into an area intended for far fewer. The circumstances were hellish. 5 to a bed, thousands sprawled on filthy ground covered in waste. The odour of decay saturated the structures. This was Irma's domain, and she governed it through fear. Her penalties were inventive in their cruelty. Inmates compelled to hold heavy rocks overhead for extended periods. Attendance checks lasting from the early hours until sunrise in biting frost. Any minor shift provoking a ferocious assault. Women fell into the dirt, only to be hauled up repeatedly until they lost consciousness. But her malice extended beyond physical harm. Testimonies revealed that Irma exploited prisoners for her personal warped cravings. Once satiated, she dispatched them to the gas chambers, ending existences with indifference. She reportedly shared a connection with the notorious Angel of Death, accompanying him in choices of life and demise. Her envies proved lethal. One survivor remembered how Irma purposefully condemned young, lovely women to death out of resentment. She could not tolerate rivals. The survivor noted that if an inmate was more appealing, Irma ensured her end came swiftly. The extent of her depravity astonished even seasoned SS personnel. She maintained 2 Alsatian dogs, kept intentionally underfaved. With a grin, she released them on inmates who weakened during tasks or tripped while transporting rocks. Women were mauled while she observed, her gaze sparkling with intrigue. Yet, amid this sea of malice, a single anomaly persisted. She protected a 14-year-old girl named Alice Weiss, not once but 16 times from extermination. Whenever the selection process marked Alice for death, Irma intervened. The reason? Alice bore a resemblance to Irma's sister, Helene. In this distorted glimpse of compassion, Irma showed she could still acknowledge familial connections, but solely for her own. For countless other sisters, daughters, and mothers, she extended no pity. At Auschwitz, Irma Grese attained the pinnacle of her influence. But influence nourished itself. The timid, harassed youngster had been supplanted by a woman enthralled by superiority, her attractiveness veiling a chasm of aggression. And as the conflict shifted against Germany, she transported that chasm to her ultimate venue, the inferno of Bergen-Belsen. Beyond the wire fences and watchtowers, Irma Grese's existence was not solely characterized by violence. It was also distorted by her pursuit of closeness, aesthetics, and acknowledgement. To the captives, she embodied pure dread, but to her own self, she remained a youthful woman, conceited and driven, seeking admiration in manners as disturbing as they were illuminating. Irma was fixated on her looks. Those who survived recollected how she meticulously arranged her blonde locks, shined her footwear, and even added colour to her face. In a location where multitudes famished, she preened in front of reflections. The mismatch was jarring. The camp resembled a cemetery, yet she prepared as if for a performance. She encircled herself with emblems of authority, a crop perpetually in her grasp, a lash at her hip, famished canines under her command. For Irma, these were not mere implements. They were augmentations of her essence, elements that raised her above captives and comrades alike. But her interpersonal bonds disclosed something more sinister. Accounts imply she pursued relations with both male and female inmates. For those imprisoned, her focus was a fatal verdict. Tenderness today, annihilation tomorrow. The closeness was tainted, exploitative, and wholly centered on mastery. When ennui set in, lives concluded. Her alleged association with the Angel of Death positioned her near the selections, the feared procedure where people were sorted into labourers or the doomed. It was said she delighted in this duty, walking alongside him, her vision sweeping over inmates, her finger designating survival or extinction. Authority and longing merged into a single mesmerizing ceremony. And yet under her haughtiness lay inconsistencies. She frequently discussed achieving renown post-war, not as an offender, but as a screen idol. In her fantasy, she envisioned herself not as a fiend, but as a figure fated for celebrity, cherished for her allure. The disparity between truth and her perception was eerie. Even in instances where she exhibited a spark of kindness, saving young Alice because of the similarity to her sister, it was not broad sympathy, but a contorted mirror of her ego and kin relations. Her existence outside the uniform was a spectacle of opposites. Conceit amid widespread mortality, yearning intertwined with malice. Aspirations of elegance constructed on the remnants of her prey. She was not merely an overseer. She was a performer, orchestrating displays of strength, charm, and terror for an unwilling spectatorship. But the stage was bound to close. For even as she enacted this macabre dual existence, the regime was disintegrating, and Irma Grese would soon confront a judgment she could neither dominate nor seduce her way free from. In January 1945, the Soviet forces were progressing, and Auschwitz was falling apart. The SS mandated thousands of inmates onto death marches, compelled relocations through blizzards and frost, where the frail dropped and were executed by the wayside. Irma participated in these treks, her lash and dogs still accompanying her, urging depleted captives toward an uncertain destiny. By March 1945, she was relocated to Bergen-Belsen, a camp spiraling into utter disorder. With logistics disrupted and the Nazi structure collapsing, the situation turned cataclysmic. Overpacked quarters brimmed with filth. Diseases like typhus and hunger claimed hundreds daily. Inmates perished on uncovered floors, dividing scant coverings among vast numbers. Even in this abyss, Irma persisted in her dominion of brutality. Those who lived through it recalled her removing clothing from women, assaulting them with flexible batons, or compelling the moribund to engage in exercises until they succumbed. Mere days prior to freedom, she was observed colliding the skulls of two siblings for consuming discarded scraps. To the inmates, she rapidly acquired a fresh epithet, the Beast of Belsen. On April 15, 1945, British armoured vehicles breached the entrances. Deliverance arrived, but so did accountability. Just 2 days afterward, on April 17, Irma Grese was apprehended by British troops. She offered no opposition. She made no pleas. When interrogated by a reporter regarding her deeds, she responded icily that it was their obligation to eliminate elements detrimental to society to secure Germany's tomorrow. No regret, no doubt. At the Belsen proceedings, one after another, survivors testified to her viciousness. The assaults, the canines, the choices, the resentments that sentenced blameless women to oblivion. Faced with irrefutable accounts, Irma refuted all. She conceded to maintaining order, but labelled the remainder as fabrications, mocking that the accusers were exaggerating minor issues. Her presumption astonished even her detainers. While incarcerated, awaiting verdict, she groomed her hair each day, grinned slyly at sentries, and mused about starring in films after the conflict. In her imagination, the trial was merely another act, with her as the enchanting protagonist. But the annals would not afford her the conclusion she envisioned. On November 17, 1945, Irma received a death sentence by hanging, the youngest female executed under British jurisdiction in that century. On December 13, 1945, the executioner readied the scaffold at Hamelin prison. As she approached, Irma showed no trepidation. She bore a subtle grin, as though continuing her performance. When prompted for last statements, she uttered a single word quickly. Then, with a sudden fall, it concluded, the beautiful beast ceased to exist. No sorrow was expressed. No kin mourned. For someone who had extinguished so many lives, her own terminated abruptly, dispassionately, and without ritual. The tale of Irma Grese stands as one of the most disturbing enigmas of World War II. She was youthful, attractive, with a countenance that might belong on a cinema advertisement or in a household photo. Yet, beneath that surface resided a being devoured by animosity, jealousy, and an insatiable desire for supremacy. Her narrative compels us to face a disquieting reality. Malevolence does not invariably appear grotesque. At times, it smiles. At times, it resembles a common girl from a milk farm. At times, it captivates with azure eyes and fair tresses. And in that illusion resides the utmost peril. Irma's brutality did not emerge suddenly. It developed gradually from a fractured household, from brainwashing, from a culture where aggression became the medium of influence. Her account serves as a reminder that fiends are not innate. They are constructed incrementally by doctrines, by loathing, by apathy. And yet, even at the zenith of her offences, she adhered to illusions. She fantasized about celebrity, about acclaim, about being revered. She thought her attractiveness would protect her from retribution. But the noose at Hamelin demonstrated differently. Her charm could not rescue her. Her youthfulness could not rescue her. The records would recall her not as a performer, but as the beautiful beast. The individuals she tormented merited more. They merited existence, affection, and futures. Instead, their identities are etched into the quiet of history, a quiet interrupted solely by narratives of their anguish. So, what insight does her tale impart? Perhaps it is that wickedness lurks among us, frequently in open view, awaiting societal neglect to allow its expansion. How many similar figures might exist today, their genuine essence concealed behind allure, drive, or attractiveness? The response is alarming, for the past has illustrated that when hatred goes unopposed, when malice is pardoned, and when authority is bestowed upon those who covet it, another such being will emerge. Always remember the sufferers. Always remember the visages behind the figures. And always remember that the bleakest episodes of humankind are perpetually one moment of inaction from recurrence. The narrative of Irma Grese is not merely a recollection of events. It is a cautionary echo that resonates through time, urging vigilance against the seeds of cruelty that can sprout in the most unexpected places. Her journey from a simple farm life to the depths of inhumanity illustrates how personal traumas, combined with a toxic environment, can forge a path of destruction. The early loss of her mother created a void that was never filled with love or guidance, only with harsh lessons in survival through force. This foundation made her susceptible to the allure of a system that promised strength and belonging, even if it meant stepping on the lives of others. As she progressed through the ranks, each new position amplified her sense of invincibility, turning minor acts of control into grand displays of terror. The camps became her world, where the boundaries of right and wrong dissolved, replaced by a hierarchy of power that rewarded the ruthless. In reflecting on her actions, one cannot help but ponder the role of society in enabling such transformations. The propaganda that saturated her youth, the indifference of those around her, and the structured evil of the regime all contributed to her descent. It was not just her choices, but the collective failures that allowed her to thrive in darkness. Her story compels us to examine our own times, to question where similar patterns might be emerging, hidden behind facades of normalcy or charisma. By expanding our understanding of how ordinary individuals can become instruments of horror, we arm ourselves against repetition. The victims' voices, though often silenced in life, must continue to speak through history, reminding us of the cost of complacency. In the end, Irma's execution marked not just the end of one life, but a symbol of justice for countless others, a stark warning that no mask of beauty can forever hide the beast within. Yet, to truly honour those lost, we must commit to fostering empathy, challenging hatred, and ensuring that power is wielded with humanity at its core. Only then can we hope to prevent the rise of another like her, safeguarding the fragile light of compassion in a world that has seen too much shadow.